Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today we are going to continue our conversation on the shit wars started by Donald Trump and Israel, right? It's been day 4 since Israel and Donald Trump launched their war of aggression against Iran, and it's been a massive pummeling for Israel, despite the fact that Iran's leadership, most of Iran's leadership had been taken out, but they are fighting really, really hard. And this has to happen. And this is happening. This is happening because this is literally an existential threat for the Iranian people. They have to go all the way, so there are no half measures with them. Now, a lot of developments has arisen. There are a lot of things that have happened over the course of the last 4 days. New revelations are beginning to come up. Remember, when this war started, the US and Israel said they started this war for regime change. The US specifically said they wanted to change the regime in Iran. They said they wanted to destroy Iran's ability or capacity to own nuclear weapons. They wanted to destroy the ability to have ballistic missiles. That was their motivations for going. That's the motivations. That was the excuse they gave for going into this campaign. But now that shit has hit the fan, they're beginning to revise all that. So much so that Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, and even Donald Trump himself, they have come out to give the actual reasons why they struck Iran. And I can tell you for a fact, it's not for any of the other reasons that I mentioned earlier. It's basically Israel leading the US like a dog on a leash into this conflict. So we're going to cover that. We're going to see what Marco Rubio said about how the US got into this conflict. Subsequent to all this, subsequent to the Iranian missile barrage on Israel and other parts of the Middle East, the Iron Dome is suffering from iron deficiency. It's failing massively. Many of these missiles are hitting their targets and it's causing massive damage. I mean, up to 12 people were buried in Israel today. Up to 6 US service members have been killed. Up to three fighter jets, US fighter jets, and multiple drones, maybe going into dozens, have been destroyed. Multiple US bases have been hit. So all these things is happening, and what's happening is that the interceptors for trying to shoot down the Iranian missiles, they're running low. In fact, the Gulf Arab states are already saying that they are running low on these interceptors, and within a few days' time, they will be left with nothing. So a lot of embassies, a lot of US embassies have been hit. Do you know? Imagine a situation where a US embassy, not just one, multiple US embassies in Saudi Arabia, in Israel itself, have been hit by Iran. This is a massive embarrassment for the US because they went into this war half-cocked. They thought it was going to be a walk in the park. Now, there's been a lot of security threats, obviously, to US citizens in the Middle East. And they want to get out. But do you know what the Trump administration's plan for them to get out is? We're going to cover all that. The Trump administration or the Trump regime has absolutely no plan to get US citizens out of the Middle East. So they are essentially left to fend for themselves, being put at risk by the stupidity of their government, who started a needless war. And then finally, we're going to talk about how Donald Trump is essentially begging for a ceasefire, and Iran is saying, nope, we are not going to accept a ceasefire at this point in time. And why should they? They are on a roll. No, this is an existential crisis for them. They are literally fighting for their lives. And this is what happens when you push someone to the wall, when they have nothing to lose anymore. They're already at the bottom. They are at rock bottom. They can't go lower than this. So what do they have to do? They have to fight back hard, and that's what they're doing. So I'm going to look at Marco Rubio, what he said about how this war started, how the US got into this war. We're going to look at that right Now, okay, let me just share my screen for us to take a look at that. Yeah. Yes. So this is from Midas Touch. So
play this clip.
There absolutely was an imminent threat, and the imminent threat was that we knew that if Iran was attacked, and we believed they would be attacked, that they would immediately come after us. And we were not going to sit there and absorb a blow before we responded, because the Department of War assessed that if we did that, if we waited for them to hit us first after they were attacked, and by someone else, Israel attacked them, they hit us first, and we waited for them to hit us, we would suffer more casualties and more deaths. We went proactively in a defensive way to prevent them from inflicting higher damage. Had we not done so, there would have been hearings on Capitol Hill about how we knew that this was going to happen, and we didn't act preemptively to prevent more casualties and more loss of life.
So let's try and unpack this clusterfuck that Marco Rubio just said. So the US had absolutely no plan to go to war with Iran. They had no plan, at least at this point in time, to strike Iran. In fact, they were actually having negotiations with Iran on their nuclear deal, and it seemed that they were progressing. But then the US decided to strike Iran anyway because they knew that Israel was going to do this. Israel knew that the US was having talks with Iran, and they decided that this was the perfect time to strike Iran, sabotaging the peace efforts, because they knew that Iran was going to agree to to agree to many of these terms. So the Israelis, these are sick people. Something is wrong. There's a clear pattern. This was what happened last year while the US was having negotiations with Israel, with Iran. Israel attacks so that the US has no option. And this idea that you knew that Israel was going to attack them, instead of talking to your ally to say, hold on, we're having talks with these people, don't attack them, let's see how we can come to a reasonable solution. They just said, well, go ahead, our hands are tied. The Israelis are going to do what they want to do anyway, and if they do that, the Iranians are going to hit us, so why not just hit them? What kind of roundabout logic is that? What kind of stupid roundabout logic is that? So the Israel essentially just dog walks the US into this conflict that the US wasn't even prepared for. They forced their hand into the. How can the country smaller than the size of New Jersey be controlling? This is the tail wagging the dog. The tail wagging the dog. That the US could not contain Israel. That they got Israel. Israel got them into this mess, and you can just see that they were not prepared for this war because they're just making things as they go. Now, this admission, which is just coming out today, is a face-saving effort by the Trump administration to say that, well, we didn't start this war, we never wanted this war, our hands were pushed. But it just makes them look weak and incompetent. That Israel is able to this is they're trying to push the blame to Israel, but it's not working. It's not going to work anyway, because it's just crazy that something like this would happen, that they would allow something like this to happen, and they're trying to save face. Same thing. Mike Johnson repeated the same thing. Speaker Mike Johnson repeated the same thing, and even later on, Donald Trump himself would say the same thing. Let's just take a look at this.
To the U.S., to our troops, to our installations, to our assets in the region and beyond. And they determined, because of the exquisite intelligence that we had, that if Israel fired upon Iran and took action against Iran to take out the missiles, then they would have immediately retaliated against U.S. personnel and assets. We have troops in harm's way, and we have many Americans in the region, and that was of a great concern.
And then Donald Trump's ambassador.
Now, this explanation itself doesn't make sense, because all this while, Iran hasn't attacked the US. The US did not attack Iran. So why were they so confident at this time that if Israel were to attack Iran, that Iran was going to attack the US in return? Iran only said, you know what? And the reason why Iran has gone this far, is because they're tired of being pushed. They're tired of being harassed. They're tired of being bullied. And I can bet you for a fact that if the US had not joined Israel in this campaign, then Iran would not be hitting all the US bases as you're finding today. Do you know what international embarrassment it is that the multiple US bases are being hit all across the Middle East? Consistently, the Iranians are still it's as if they have escalation dominance right now. They are escalating their attacks on US installations. Now, so this brings us to the other conversation about what to do with US citizens who have found themselves stuck in the Middle East, who are now essentially fearing for their safety because of this stupid war that Donald Trump and Israel started. How are they going to get out of that place? Do you know what the US government, the US regime's plan is for them to get out? Nothing. No plan whatsoever. The US government has absolutely no plan to rescue and to evacuate US citizens who are at high risk of being targeted in the Middle East at this point in time. And then the US government put out some statements giving people tips on how to get out of the Middle East. Let's hear this from, I think Mada Stoch covered this. So let's
has just issued urgent evacuation orders for Americans in the Middle East, rather than telling the Americans how the Trump regime plans on helping them or how the Trump regime will provide emergency airlifts. Instead, the Trump regime State Department has posted the following: depart now via commercial means due to serious safety risks. If you're in, then it lists every Middle East country. Get out now via commercial means. Now, the Trump regime has gutted the State Department, and so there's no one who can physically help the people, the American citizens who are now abandoned in the Middle East. And the Trump regime just left our citizens stranded there with no way of getting out, saying, go leave via commercial means, when the airports in all of these Middle East countries are under attack right now from Iran, which Iran and everybody was warning the United States would happen if the U.S. engaged in the invasion. Now, the Assistant Secretary of State, who was runs hair salons, that's one of the reasons I think she was selected. She says, Rubio and the State Department urges Americans depart now from the countries listed below. Then she tells people to take commercial planes. There's a war right now that's engulfing the whole Middle East.
So this advice or this move by the US regime reveals two things. One, it reveals that the US is unprepared. The US did not prepare for this. And if they did prepare for this, the fact that they did not have an evacuation plan in place is very worrying. Is very worrying. I think the UK and some other countries have made plans to take their citizens out of the war zone to put them to safety. So how can you be the biggest military in the world? How can you be the biggest economy in the world? How can you be the most quote unquote advanced civilization in the world at this point in time, and you're not able to provide basic safety and services for your citizens? But I guess this is what MAGA voted for. MAGA, they must be having intense orgasms at this point in time because they finally have a government that does nothing for the people. Because that's what they always say. The government is supposed to do nothing. But the government can put you at risk. The government, the US regime, is literally putting Americans at risk. And they're doing nothing to help them get out of this situation, this terrible situation that they put them in. What manner of incompetence, what manner of insensitivity? I mean, Donald Trump himself has said that American soldiers are going to die. Yeah, it's a normal thing. They're going to die. His sons are of fighting age. They are not in the military. There is no conversation about Trump's sons going into this war. There is none whatsoever. So there's no personal risk for him. There's no personal risk for Donald Trump. But this is where you find yourself. Now, I'm going to go over to cover the fact that, that the Gulf nations, the Gulf states are complaining right now that they are running low in interceptors. They're running low in interceptors. And this is also true for Israel. They're going to be out in no due time, and it's going to be very, very, very problematic.
Have been extremely successful in protecting their countries from Iranian attack, and that they might be looking for some way to persuade Donald Trump to give him an off-ramp, some way to persuade him to cut this campaign short. That said, all of what we heard today from Trump himself, from his Secretary of Defense or War, Pete Hegseth, and certainly from the Israeli leadership, all of it points to a very long campaign. And regarding what the head of the Israeli opposition, Yair Lapid, said, I think it's a complex situation in Israel. It is true that Israelis are tired of containing threats, but it is also true that Israelis don't have much confidence in their current leadership, and they're just plain tired. So with 12 funerals today, Israelis are feeling
in Jerusalem. No, good evening to you. Can we start with the situation regarding Iran's attacks on Israel and Israel's policy? The words of Benjamin Netanyahu we heard, and Yair Lapid, they're saying Israel is tired of containing these kind of problems. What is your sense of where we go from here?
I think, Mark, that we are really at a juncture, really at the end of the third day of this new war that could go in many different directions, any of them very consequential. There are noises being heard just in the last hour or two that Qatar and the United Arab Emirates may be running out of their anti-missile missiles that have been extremely successful in protecting their countries from Iranian attack, and that they might be looking for some way to persuade Donald Trump to give him an off-ramp, some way to persuade.
Yeah, so that is it. They're running out of missiles, and this is also happening in Israel as well. They're going to run out of interceptor missiles. I mean, look at what happened during the 12th-day war. At first, many of the missiles that Iran was sending into Israel were being intercepted. But as the war progressed, Iran sent fewer missiles, but more of them hit their targets, because at that point in time, the US and Israel, they were running low on their stock. So this is Iran's advantage. They can mass produce these weapons that don't really cost so much, and they can cause incredible damage to US infrastructure, to infrastructure in these Gulf Arab states. So they're saturating everything. Now, I think this strategy that Iran used, brilliant strategy, because if they had focused only on Israel, then all these other missiles may have been pushed to Israel to help contain the barrage that's coming from Iran. But the fact that they dispersed their attack, they are hitting multiple targets at the same time, it makes it difficult for you to concentrate your forces in one place. And didn't the Israelis learn anything from the 12th-day war? Didn't they learn anything? What manner of hubris makes someone to repeat the same mistake within less than a year? What level of confidence gives the Israelis this mind to say that let's attack this country again within 6 months? Because they knew that the US was going to be pulled into it, as the US regime administration officials they've confessed, as they've revealed. Marco Rubio, Mike Johnson, Donald Trump himself, they've said that, well, we just had to go along with it because we knew that Israel was going to attack them and they were going to retaliate. So we just had to go along with it. It is insane. Now, the funny thing is that they did all this with the hopes that the US, Israel, went into this campaign against Iran with the hope to cause regime change. But it does seem that it's going to be having the opposite effect. There is going to be regime change. However, it's likely going to be on US allies, and it's already started with Bahrain. I mean, the people in Bahrain, they are already coming out to protest against the government. And when they see missiles coming from Iran, they are hailing, they are clapping, they are happy, they're jubilating. This is going to have reverberations in that region. Many of these monarchies, these Gulf Arab monarchies and dictatorships, they are going to fall following this. The Netanyahu regime might even fall. Trump's regime might even fall from this. So you see, their plan was to cause regime change in Iran, but it's having a boomerang effect. It is now affecting those countries themselves. So let me just play that. Let me just play that to show you how it's happening. Let me play that to show you how it's happening. Right. Good. Screen. Yes.
Such is the level of trepidation amongst the Americans that they have sent a desperate message to his own citizens across.
Not this one. Not this one. Yeah, share screen. It has to be this. Yeah.
Bahrain was the one that took the biggest hits. Why? It has one of the largest U.S. military contingents anywhere in the world. That's where the Fifth Fleet is. So obviously, Iran, with precision-guided missiles, had decided a long time ago that they were going to hit that place. Now, what's interesting about this is that the missiles are leaving Iran, flying into Bahrain, and you would think the people of Bahrain would be nervous, maybe taking cover, maybe worried. No, the people of Bahrain were outside applauding while their government is getting hit and while U.S. installations are being bombed. You need to watch this. Here it is.
So this just shows a massive disconnect between people, ordinary people in countries, and their leadership. And it happens all over the world. I think there are many Americans who are dissatisfied with what the Trump regime is doing, who are not in support of what Trump is doing. And you find that repeat in many countries. Governments are going to go against the wish of their people, and they're just going to do things that make absolutely no sense. And in these Gulf Arab states, there are no exception. These people are actually living under monarchical dictatorships. If the US is so concerned about democracy, they will not be allies with these dictatorships that you have in the Middle East, the Gulf Arab states. They're not democracies. They're not democracies. You want to bring democracy to Iran, your own allies are dictatorships. So you don't actually care about that. You only care about your interests. Once your interests are being taken care of, you can turn a blind eye to every other thing. But the implication of this is that regime change is going to happen in many of these Gulf Arab states because the people are fed up with their government. They are fed up with their government just bending over to Israel and bending over to the United States and getting rammed repeatedly. They are fed up with all that, and they're going to rise up. So instead of having regime change in Iran, you're going to have regime change in many of these Gulf Arab states. You're possibly going to have a regime change in Israel, and you're possibly also going to have regime change in the United States of America, which is going to be a good thing. Trump has done so much damage to the reputation of the US. He's done irreparable damage to the reputation, to ties, to allies. You can see that many of the European allies, they're just leaving Trump alone. If it was before Trump insulted all of them, you probably get France, Germany, the UK, and some other countries offering to help. But Trump has insulted all of them. So what would they do? They're backing out of it. They are backing out of it. And Trump and Israel, they are essentially left alone. They don't have a way out of this. They really don't have a way out of this at this point in time. They've dug themselves into a corner. They've backed themselves into a corner. And it's a terrible situation for them. So they are going to look for, how is Trump going to get out of this mess? He has said that he has not ruled that he doesn't have the jibs about sending troops into Iran. Well, you can try. You have dropped a lot of bombs, you've dropped mighty bombs, but the Iranians are still steadfast. They're still going, they're not backing down. So what does that tell you? Now we're going to look at what Chris Murphy said about how Trump has lost control of this war. How Trump has lost control of this war, which is, any sane person will know that this was going to happen. Yes, so this should be it.
So it's clear.
So just take it to the point where Chris Murphy, yes, here.
Anyway, listen to Chris Murphy.
I want to give you a little detail on why it's almost certain that Trump's war against Iran is going to turn into a disaster. It really comes down to an essential question. Is this only an air campaign, or is Trump planning on a ground invasion? Now, originally, he and his allies said this was only going to be an air campaign, planes essentially dropping bombs on Iran, missiles being launched at Iran. Here's the problem with that. There is absolutely no evidence that an air campaign alone ever leads to a despotic regime falling, being replaced with a democracy. There's actually no history of that happening, and we've launched plenty of air campaigns against countries all over the world, including in the Middle East. What happens is it just hardens the resolve of the existing government to continue its domestic repressive policies and its provocations overseas, and no democracy emerges. Trump has killed the supreme leader and a handful of the people that surround him, but already what we're hearing is that hardliners are taking control of the government. Okay, but what if he actually does launch a ground invasion? And Trump said today that he's still leaving that option on the table. Well, that's another Iraq war, right? That's an epic disaster. That's not dozens of US troops dying. That's thousands of US troops dying. We didn't.
And, the indications are there that it's going to be very bloody. I mean, in just 4 days, the number of troops that the US has lost already, which I think they are underreporting. If they're going to report the accurate numbers, it's going to be much higher than the 6 service members that have reported to have been killed. So imagine launching a ground war. How many of these wars has the US actually won on its terms? The war in Iraq, did they really win that? Iraq was destroyed. The war in Afghanistan, fighting the Taliban for 20 years and handing over back to the Taliban. Is it the Vietnam War? Which of these have been successfully resolved to the terms that the US really, really wanted? Is it in Libya? It's been a massive failure all over all these campaigns. So simply having military weapons, simply having the biggest gun does not mean that it doesn't guarantee. Yeah, you can blow stuff up. You're going to blow a lot of stuff up, but that's it. That's the end of what you can do. That's the limitation. You're not going to be able to win any war. You're just going to be able to cause a lot of damage, destruction, and kill a lot of people. That's it.
Win the war in Iraq by any stretch of the imagination. We created an insurgency that we're still dealing with in the region. We didn't win the war in Afghanistan, 20 years of fighting, and we had to withdraw. The very people that we dislodged were back in charge. So if it's an air campaign, no evidence that that will work. The bad people will still be in charge. If it's a ground invasion, well, maybe you can get rid of the bad people, but that's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of American deaths, and nobody in this country wants that. That's the choice here. That's the reason why many of us, right from the jump, have been fairly certain that this is going to result in a disaster.
The only people who don't seem to know that this is going to result in a disaster are Donald Trump and his regime members. because they can't think for the life of anybody. They can't think. They don't know what is going on. They don't understand geopolitics.
US
They don't understand anything. They just thought that they would go in a few days, take out the Iranian leader, that Iran would capitulate, and they would declare victory. But no, in their first strike, they killed the leader of Iran. Yet, after that, Iran, in last year, when a similar attack occurred against Iran, Iran waited like 12 hours before they started their retaliation. Less than 2 hours after this happened, Iran has started firing back, started hitting back. They were hitting really, really hard. So this goes to show that they are much more prepared for the long haul than the US is. The US weirdly does not have the capacity to sustain such a campaign. It's weird because it's the biggest military in the world, has the biggest military spend, yet it's going to be humiliated by Iran. Iran taking on the whole of the Middle East. It's insane. But this is the world that we find ourselves in today. So I'm going to take an analysis from Breaking Point that showed how Trump is losing control of this whole situation. It's a beautiful analysis. The man that they brought in was very, very articulate. He knew exactly what he was saying. And that's what we're going to cover last before we end the stream for today. It's going to be this. Yes.
All right, everyone. We are fortunate to be joined by friend of the show, Dr. Trita Parsi of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you, sir.
Good to be with you guys.
So we just played for the audience, Marco Rubio and Mike Johnson, both saying, no, the imminent threat came from the fact that we knew Israel was going to attack Iran, regardless of whether we involved ourselves. We knew that would put our U.S. service members at risk. Therefore, we felt compelled to strike Iran first. Your reaction to those extraordinary revelations?
I'm delighted that he has spelled it out, that this is the reason, that at the end of the day, the Israelis have been driving the boat on this one, and that the United States has followed their lead and let them decide when the U.S. goes to war and when it doesn't. This is, at the end of the day, a decision they made. They made a decision to let the Israelis decide, and now they're trying to hide behind that as if that is some sort of a self-defense. At this point, there's no speculation valid any longer as to whether Israel is the driving force behind this or not. It is coming out of the mouth of Rubio, and it's coming out of the mouth of the Speaker of the House as well. It is now clear. This is what they decided. This is not, by any definition, America first. This is Israel first.
This is
and this is what MAGA voted for. You thought we were going to vote for a president when all U.S. lawmakers, all U.S. politicians across the aisle, they are unanimously aligned on one thing, which is Israel. I mean, in no other issue are American politicians aligned. Nothing, even within the country itself, things to the benefit of Americans. No, none whatsoever. When it comes to Israel, everybody falls in line. And then you bring someone whose ego can be easily manipulated. And you can see how Israel, as Netanyahu probably went to him, giving him all this, beautiful ego-boosting speech of Trump being the only one to be able to achieve all this, to be the only one to be able to put to bed the Iranian question once and for all. And Trump, it got to his head, and he decided to just go along with it, not knowing that he was being manipulated. He's worked himself into a trap. This guy is certainly going to just capitulate and give up one day without any sense of shame whatsoever that he's lost. I mean, he did that with the Houthis, said he was going to bomb the Houthis into the Stone Age, and then he went ahead to cut a deal with the Houthis. And the Houthis are not even as formidable as the Iranians are. So let's see how this goes.
probably the most consequential Kinsley gaffe in American history, where they accidentally, tell the truth. And that's just one where I really don't even know where to go from here. I do think it is worth noting that the administration has laid out the most maximalist goals and is now making a mockery of America first. Let's say, put A6, let's say, up there on the screen. I really loved this exchange. So Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire, he put out a tweet. He's like, I've got some questions about this whole operation. And Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt released a statement and said, let me reiterate all of the objectives. We're going to destroy the regime's missile, raise our missile industry to the ground. We're going to annihilate the Navy. We're going to ensure the regime's terrorist proxies can no longer operate. We will stop them from making and using IEDs. And when, by the way, IED literally means improvised. So, okay. Guarantee that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. Preventing the regime from threatening America. Killing terrorists is good. And there's a long continued diatribe. I was like, you know, whenever she was meant to address concerns about regime change, this is a regime change manifesto. I don't see any way that there could be a realistic off-ramp without effective surrender from the Trump administration. Curious for your review.
So remember that during the last iteration of this aggression against Iran, they made similar demands that, you know, it was complete surrender. That was what Netanyahu said. That was what Trump said. There was unconditional, Iran has to unconditionally surrender. What happened? Did that happen? These guys are shameless. They are going to state a goal, like Trump. He has said he's going to stop all these wars on day one. Rather, he's adding to these wars, he's causing more wars. He's going to fix so many problems on day one. He will be president, all this would not have happened. But things are going down the shit under his administration. And he lacks the self-awareness to be reflective, to say, I made this promise to the American people and it's going sideways. It's going in the opposite direction.
So here's what I think has happened. I think, first of all, you're right, but here's, I think, how we got here. The administration was led by the Israelis to believe that this was going to be a very simple operation. They thought that by Sunday evening, this would have been wrapped up, that the regime would have imploded as a result of the assassination of the supreme leader. That obviously did not work. Twice, reportedly, perhaps even three times, Trump reached out and tried to see if he could get a ceasefire from the Iranians. The Iranians rejected it.
Rightly so. I mean, why would they accept a ceasefire at this point? They did it the last time, and this is what resulted. It just gave the US and Israel time to recoup, to recover themselves, to launch another offensive against Iran. So Iran is, you know, the offensive. The winds are favoring Iran at this point in time. You don't stop the game when you still have miles ahead and you're winning.
Can go into as to why the Iranians rejected it. So now they're stuck in a situation in which they understand that the Iranian game plan is to prolong this and expand this war and play to what their relative strength is, which is they can withstand this, whereas Trump probably cannot, not militarily, but politically. He cannot.
Do you know what it means that the most sanctioned country in the world is able to build this formidable fighting force? They're able to take on the US, the biggest military in the world. They're able to take on Israel. They're able to take on the might of Israel and the US, combined might. They're able to take on the whole of the Middle East. I mean, I think they've attacked up to 12 countries now, 6 or 12 countries at this point in time. Hats off to the Iranian people for being bold enough to show what a paper tiger, to show that the emperor has no clothes, for this humiliation that the Trump regime and the Israelis are going through at this point in time. Now, it's going to come at a huge cost to innocent Iranians, but they have no choice at this point in time, because if they don't do this, they're still going to get casualties. They're still going to be pummeled. They'll be pummeled even more. So however the number and amount of casualties they are getting at this point in time, it is still way better than doing nothing. It's way better than trying to appease the Americans and appease the Iranians, the Israelis, because they have shown themselves to be unreasonable, people that cannot be trusted. Their word is not their bond. They lack integrity.
Withstand this for a couple of weeks. So now the Trump administration is trying to essentially convince the Iranians that no, the United States is more than ready to withstand this for a long time. He suddenly said 4 weeks, and that now, as a result of the Iranians refusing a ceasefire, he is going even more maximalist. So he is throwing good money after bad money after his first completely unrealistic expectation was not met. And this is the very definition of losing control. We're not even 2 or 3 days into the war, and it's already clear they have lost control.
And it's very easy to see how they lost control because these guys are a bunch of incompetents. All the people that Trump surrounds himself, he has this unique ability. He's massively gifted in surrounding himself with dimwits, incompetent people. So I can see how easy it got out of control for them.
Look at how they are grasping for straws, not just to find what objectives they should have, but also how to justify them. And in that effort, they have gone as far as to say that Iran is at war with civilization, to actually admitting that all of this was done because Israel decided it was time to go.
Assalamu alaikum. This is an urgent appeal for the people of Yemen. The suffering in Yemen.
So I want to go back to why Trump let himself be led around by the nose by Israel, because clearly there was some reluctance from the administration. You know, they were concerned. You had the top military brass here leaking to basically every newspaper they could get a hold of to say, this is a real problem. We are not ready. There's an interceptor issue. This is not going to go well. There's tremendous risks here. And yet, in spite of all of that, and in spite of all of the very clear campaign promises that, you know, we're going to play them later, he made, J.D. Vance made, Tulsi Gabbard made, RFK Jr. made, Stephen Miller made, like every top person in this administration said, oh, of course, we're not going to go to war with Iran. In spite of all of that, he still ends up making the decision to do Israel's bidding. Like, what can explain that? Is it just the power of the Israel? Is it Miriam Adelson money? Like, how does this calculation get made when you have so many people, from the political people to the military people, warning that this is going to be a disaster?
It's a combination of hubris, Trump's ego, and stupidity. You know, Trump is a vain person who thinks that he can. You know, like he would say, he's going to say later on, Trump has been on a roll, his winning streak, just like Adolf Hitler. He, you know, blitzkrieg. He was able to take Poland. He was able to go into France, you know, take the Netherlands, take Austria, and so many other countries relatively easy. And when that happens, you begin to buy your own bullshit. You begin to believe in your invincibility, and you begin to think that you can do literally anything. And that's what really gets these people, these dictators, these strongmen. It is their own hubris, their own ego that becomes their downfall, because then they are unable to listen to reason. They're unable to see things in reality, things for what they are, the way they truly are. They just believe in themselves. And reality doesn't give a shit about your beliefs. It's going to smack you really hard. And Trump is going to find out how hard reality can slap someone.
It's really difficult to explain, and I absolutely cannot claim to have an answer. I think a part of the answer, though, is he has been lulled into this belief that everything he has done has been an absolutely amazing success, and everything he did was in contradiction to the conventional wisdom and their advice. They told him that he can't move the embassy. He did. Nothing happened. They told him that he couldn't recognize the Golan Heights. He did. Nothing happened. They told him you can't kill Soleimani. He did. In his view, nothing happened. They told him that he can't take out Fordo. He did. In his view, nothing happened. And then, of course, he did Venezuela. He's on this massive sugar high, the mother of all sugar highs, and it made it easier for the Israelis under those circumstances to tell him, look, the Iranians are just so weak. All you need to do is push a little bit. You're going to be the hero. You're going to be the president that finally puts an end to this regime. Everyone said that you can't do it. That's precisely why you should do it, because only you can prove them wrong.
So what you...
And I agree with this analysis. Absolutely agree. It just plays into Trump's vanity. If he wants to stroke Trump's ego, he's going to do what? He's going to do your bidding. This guy is so easily manipulable. I mean, Netanyahu is just playing him like a fiddle, just playing him. Trump is dancing to the tune of Netanyahu.
You mentioned
maybe they mocked up a newspaper cover like Zoran
Yeah.
did.
I mean, they
Well-
play to his psychology. The
Mhm.
Iranians did not.
Right. Yeah. Right. And we should say that is we should fault their negotiating team as well. But now we are where we are. And so, what do you see? You said that the Iranians have rejected 2, maybe 3 diplomatic overtures from the Trump administration. What is the internal logic inside of the regime right now? It seems pretty clear that they expected to take mass casualties at the top. They have decentralized military command. What is their internal assessment right now, from far as you can tell, from how they're doing and for what they're planning?
The first thing we have to say to truly understand how they're thinking is that they truly, unlike the Israelis who oftentimes throw out and say, oh, this is existential for them, this truly is existential. And this is why they're making the decisions the way they're making it. They believe that a premature ceasefire, one in which after the US has scored a major victory, if they were to accept it, all it would do, it would allow the US and Israel to regroup, remobilize, and then 6 months later, relaunch the war. If there's to be a ceasefire, it has to be a prolonged and durable one. The only way the ceasefire could be durable, they believe, is if this war ends up being tremendously costly to all sides, so that all sides believe it was a mistake to start it, and as a result, believe it would be a mistake to restart it. If they agree to a ceasefire too quickly, without that cost actually being felt, they believe that it will only give the other side, the US and Israel, time to be able to regroup and then once again attack Iran. This is the conclusion they drew after agreeing to a ceasefire in June.
Exactly. That was the mistake they made the first time around. Agreeing to that ceasefire when they were having the upper hand was a big mistake. And the Iranians are not dumb. They're not going to make the same mistake twice. The Israelis are dumb because of their the hubris. I have never seen a more self-absorbed, self-important, main character syndrome driven kind of people in all my life, in all of existence. They think that they are the center of the universe, so everything must be at their will, at their beck and call. They must have their way. So they might be foolish enough to want to try this again, but Iran is going to make it as painful and as costly as possible so that they remember the pain. I mean, look at what's happening right now. Despite the beating that Iran is taking, Tel Aviv is on fire. Haifa is on fire. Jerusalem is on fire. Good. Because you need to learn this lesson that you don't just bully people. You don't mess with other people.
Of them believe that it was premature. Many of them believe that the Israelis were in a very, very bad situation because they had run out of interceptors.
They were.
And it was a mistake for the Iranians to agree to that ceasefire, and they're paying for that mistake now.
I mean, that was another incredible moment from Rubio, is he also talked about that interceptor.
He admitted it.
Yeah, he talked about, they've got these drones and they're very inexpensive. And meanwhile, we're shooting all these interceptors. They can make the drones much more quickly than we can make the interceptors. It's like, okay, then why are we doing this if that's math that
And
you're
once
aware
you're
of?
in this situation and you recognize that logic, which they should have recognized before, it actually pushes them to go all out as well. And that is what I think we're going to see in the next couple of days. Trump is going to throw everything he has.
Tell me more about what you mean by that. And just to, as a little preamble here, we can put A9 up on the screen. We now know at least 6 Americans have been killed in action. At least 18 have been seriously wounded. You have U.S. embassies that are being attacked in a number of countries, both by Iran and also by local people. We know now we have confirmation that U.S. Marines were shooting at civilian rioters at the U.S. embassy in Karachi in Pakistan. We can put A11 up on the screen. So already the Strait of Hormuz was sort of de facto closed because the insurers pulled the plug on shipping traffic and said, basically, we're not going to insure you, or we're going to jack up the price extraordinarily. Now, Reuters is reporting Iran is notifying vessels it is officially closing the Strait of Hormuz. If officially closed, 20 plus million barrels of oil per day will be impacted, 20% of global supply. Qatar has cut off their LNG production. Gas prices in Europe have already skyrocketed some 50%. So when you say we're going to throw everything that we have at it and we're going to go big, what does that actually in effect look like?
Hello, I'm Ginger. People use me when their stomach feels off, but most people misuse me.
Let me start off by just saying one other thing that I think is important. Just a couple of days, about 3 days before Trump decided to start this war, I was in a closed meeting with a bunch of former officials, analysts, military people. And the general view in the room was the Iranians would never do this. They would never close the straits. They would never attack the GCC states. It would be too costly for them. And I think it reflected the fact that this had not really dawned upon people. The manner in which Trump is doing this is making a clear signal to the Iranians. This is an existential fight. And in an existential fight, they're not going to think about tomorrow. They're not going to think about what GCC-Iran relations are going to be a year from now. They're going to think about how they survive this war. And as a result, decisions that were perceived to be unthinkable, just empty threats from the Iranians, we are now seeing happening on a daily basis. As you pointed out, the closing of the straits. And
Yeah,
again, I think it shows the profound miscalculation, although of course those people in the room were not the decision makers. I think it reflects what also decision makers have been thinking about this. I think.
Yeah, so absolutely correct. I think this guy's analysis is spot on. I mean, they made a miscalculation. The US regime made a miscalculation. They, they misunderstood or they underestimated the Iranians. For the Iranians, this is an existential fight. This is an existential threat. So they're going to go all in. They're going to give all they have. They're going to pour all they have into this thing. This is not an existential fight for the US. So the US can be as lukewarm as possible. But for Iran, if they don't do this, they're literally going to be wiped out. Israel is going to destroy that country. So for the survival of their country, they have to go as ballistic as much as they can. They have to go as crazy. Israel thinks they're crazy. Well, Iran is going to show you that we're crazier. We can be just as crazy as you. And you can see that in their actions, hitting everybody. Everyone is getting it, like Oprah. You're going to get hit. You're going to get hit. You get a missile. You get a missile. Everybody gets a missile.
I think what is happening now is that because of this essential, I wouldn't call it panic, but really scrambling to try to figure out a new plan, the emphasis is going to be to throw everything at the Iranians. I think we're going to see significant bombardment. We're going to see an effort to use the Kurds in order to launch attacks in the Kurdish areas in the absence of other ground troops, although I wouldn't be surprised if there may be some Israeli ground troops with the Kurds, although the Kurdish numbers are not very high. It's not so much that this actually would end up becoming like a real invasion, but something that would be further effort to try to cause Tehran to lose control of the larger situation. If the Iranians are trying to expand the theater of war into areas that the US wasn't ready for, the US is responding in kind. But bottom line is, we're seeing that the original plans didn't even survive the first 5 seconds of reality.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, already this is a full-blown regional conflict, which, as you said, and by the way, Trump admitted, you don't just have to listen to you. We were surprised that they attacked the Gulf countries. He has caused absolute chaos. The State Department saying this morning, all citizens in the Gulf should leave, all of them. By the way, good luck leaving. All of the airports are closed. The U.S. ambassador, Mike Huckabee, is putting out guidance about how to get on a bus from Israel to the Sinai Peninsula and then hopefully be able to catch a flight from there to somewhere else before they can eventually get the hell out. There's over 1 million Americans.
That being said, Egypt hasn't been hit. I wonder why. Does the US have bases in Egypt? Think about it, Iran.
Who live in the region. I used to be one of them. But sticking with that, sir, let's put 810 up here on the screen just so you can already see huge strikes in the middle of Tehran, in the middle of daylight. I mean, God only knows the number of people that have already been killed, but many of the reports coming out of Iran saying that the Israeli strikes are specifically targeting these police stations. As you said, the internal logic right now for the Gulf and for the United States is that this is already intolerable from a munitions depletion standpoint for interceptors, which means that they have to go all out, bombard the country as much as humanly possible, and try to basically erode their capacity to fight. This is the North Vietnam bombing strategic logic of many, many decades. Of course, it doesn't work if you have a population and a regime which is hardened in its belief that it is completely existential. So let's say we do get this massive bombardment, an effect, effective trying to collapse the state. Let's say they do take out the missile launchers. What's next from that point? Because the regime itself will still be intact, and it's not like Trump and Israel can just declare victory.
Again, I don't think there is much of a plan. The hope was that now they're targeting a lot of police stations, IRGC headquarters, Basij headquarters. The hope is that this eventually will lead to a regime implosion because the repressive capabilities of the state will be eroded, and then magically people will rise up and take over. And, you know, there is some basis to believe that something like this could happen. To bet an entire war that it will happen is a completely different story. I go back to what I said on this show several times. I repeated it as often as I could in every interview. Trump has been led to believe that Iran is much weaker than it is. And as a result, he's gone down this path. And now we're discovering that it is not that simple. As you mentioned, the problems for people, for Americans to leave the GCC states, even leaving Israel at this point. I spoke to a friend who was traveling. He was in Dubai, can't get out, had to take a cab all the way to Oman. The border to Oman between the UN and Oman was just completely overloaded with people trying to escape Dubai and try to find a flight out of the Arabian Peninsula. Clearly no planning whatsoever from any side for this to be able to happen, yet the writing was on the wall.
And the reason there was no planning whatsoever is because they did not envisage all of this. They didn't think it was going to go this bad for the US and Israel. They thought it was going to be a walk in the park. They thought it was going to be something that they would just go in and out and you're done. Reality is giving them a smack in the face.
We've been listening to Professor Robert Pape, who's an expert on warfare and air power in particular. In 100 years of trying this, there's never been a successful regime change just using air power. We also have the recent example of Gaza, which obviously is much smaller, and where the Israelis, with our assistance, bombed the hell out of it, reduced it all to rubble effectively, and had a ground invasion, and still were not able to dislodge Hamas from power. So the arrogance, the delusion here is just extraordinary to me as someone who was not expert on these things whatsoever. Last question I had for you is, I was watching that bombardment of Tehran, looking at the fact that they've already targeted some 9 hospitals. Obviously, little girls massacred, over 160 of them at a school. Another school, I think a girls' volleyball team was killed. Are they, since the initial let's try to collapse the regime didn't work out, are they now going to pursue effectively the same strategy they pursued in Gaza?
It appears that at least on a couple of occasions that has happened. We've seen evidence of double tap attacks. There's a video of an Iranian woman who actually doesn't live in Iran. I don't know if she's Iranian American, who is crying and said that they struck this hotel. When people rushed in to try to help it, they struck again. So evidence of these double taps are now emerging.
Yep.
One thing I have to say, though, and I'm sorry to raise this, but I was on BBC last night and they aired tapes or reconstruction of tapes of 3 voices from Iran that they claim to have spoken to, who all were praising these bombings. I mean, one of them were saying that, we're applauding every time we hear a bomb. Without a doubt, I do believe that there is some level of support inside of Iran for this campaign. Certainly, there's a degree of support, although I think it's exaggerated in the diaspora. But BBC aired 3 voices who all said the same thing, giving the viewers the impression that this is a liberation war, that the people inside of Iran are just yearning to be bombed. And I had to call them out on it. I said, this is worse than the Iraq war propaganda that I've seen, because you know very well that there's a diversity of views inside the country, yet you only aired one type of a voice and give people the impression that everyone is welcoming this war, which is absolutely not the case.
And this just highlights the hypocrisy of Western media. It highlights the hypocrisy of the West itself, which has lost all morality. The West has lost all claims to morality, to integrity, to international law, to justice, to human rights. They lost all of that. And they're going to shape narratives. This is worse than 1984. As I called it earlier on in Substack, this is 1994, which is an advanced stage of 1984. They are going to tell blatant lies. I mean, look at the headlines that they put out there about the war. they're trying to paint a sympathetic picture for the Israelis. Whenever there is an Israeli casualty, they humanize it. The journalist goes out there, he picks up the shoe, picks up some personal effect of the victims to try to make you connect with them as human beings. But when this happens to school kids in Iran, it's the reporting is very impersonal. There is no humanizing those children in Iran because, according to them, some lives are more important than others. This is crazy. Anyway, Samael said this is good for Christianity. I don't know what you mean by that. I don't think it's good for Christianity because many of the people doing these terrible things self-identify as Christians. I am a Christian and I don't think this is good for Christianity. It isn't good for the image of Christianity, for people who claim to be Christians to be acting this unhinged like lunatics. Fall of our republic said, well, they might want to play the victim, talking about Israel. Of course, they'll always play the victim. That's Israel's go-to card. They'll be hitting you and they'll be screaming in pain. It's their go-to. They've always played the victim. They are the eternal victims. They're always going to keep playing the victim while they are the aggressors. And it makes absolutely no sense. But you know what? Every dog has its day. Every dog has its day. And I think the time for Israel and the Trump regime has finally come. And they're going to find out what it means to be at the receiving end of this type of aggression. Anyway, that'll be all for today. Like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in another live stream. It's bye for now.